Hello, everybody. I'm going to call the meeting to order at 6:30. We have all of our board directors in attendance, and we're missing a couple student board reps, but we have Machu joining us on the stage, on the dais. We're going to actually have him lead us in the pledge. So if you all could please stand.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you very much. We're going to move on to agenda item 2.01, which is action to approve our regular meeting agenda. May I please have a motion to approve agenda item 2.01, action to approve a regular meeting agenda?
I move to approve our regular meeting agenda.
Second that?
Vice President Miller motioned and Director Wiggins seconded. Thank you. Do we have any discussion? There's no discussion, so I will call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
The approval of agenda item 2.01, action to approve the regular meeting agenda, passes 4-0. And that takes us to agenda item 3.01, which is the public comment portion of our evening. And just as a reminder, each person will be given 3 minutes per topic to comment, and a maximum of 20 minutes per any one topic will be allowed. Speakers whose comments are less than 3 minutes in length may not defer their remaining time to others. If there are multiple speakers on one topic, speakers may be limited to points of view not yet expressed. Any person wishing his or her comments retained as part of the permanent record may submit a prepared statement to the board secretary prior to the oral presentation. The president may interrupt or terminate an individual's statement when it is too lengthy, personally directed, abusive, obscene, or irrelevant. Comments and concerns relative to district personnel will not be heard in public, but rather should be directed through the Complaints Concerning School Personnel or Programs Policy 4220. Formal presentations must be scheduled with the superintendent in writing no later than Tuesday noon, 1 week preceding the regular meeting. And last but not least, per board procedure, we are not going to respond to any questions posed by a speaker tonight, but we will follow up with you after the meeting. So we have three public comments. So first we're going to welcome Warren Iverson. Please come on up.
Hear me? Yep. Thank you again for presentation. I have nothing written down this time. Won't be as fiery or as enthusiastic as last time, but I'm still definitely involved. Last time, the public speaks, and then Valerie, the board speaks, and that's when Valerie confirmed that she was not going to continue on. And I told her after that, and then in a private conversation later, thanked her for a great character and serving of time here and personal integrity. What a wonderful person and staff member for the board that represented Tahoma very well. Also tonight, I would like to make a recommendation enthusiastically for someone else that has that same character and integrity, and that is a fellow who's been attending here, Patrick Peacock. Their family has been here longer than our family by many years. Matter of fact, they were here before Washington became a state in 1889. So a lot of good character in that, and stories you could hear about too. So enthusiastically recommend him for that position. I know he's put it in. Couple other quick comments. Last time we had a meeting, I think it's for the reading level, and it was 21% in February 2021 that had difficulty, and it improved to 14%. And that's great, but I'd like to know, what was it in 2019 or 2020 before the pandemic? You know, it may have been 7%, and 14 is still bad, you know, because couldn't interact. This is only the third meeting I've been to in 4 years, so appreciate it. The first one was pretty wild, and last week a different day, so wasn't a lot in attendance. That really concludes all I had to say. And, CTE and other things that they promote or put up, if they could put out the name, what does CTE mean? You know, because if you're in the public, you don't have any idea. And they've been great presentations I've heard. The last thing you can help me with, Chairman, I signed up for the We the People demonstration, would I be able to speak then or
Yes.
or now?
Correct. And Tamara, or actually Superintendent Hansen, can you please explain how that portion is going to work?
Yeah, double check with Tamara, but normally you don't. Gretchen, you don't have audience participation, or do you?
In the past, what happens with the students, you guys ask them, you know, which essay they present for 4 minutes, and then usually you all ask different follow-up questions. We're up for whatever you all would like us to do, but that's usually the way.
So Warren, in general, it's just the board asking
Okay.
questions of the kids after their demonstration.
So real quick, I just want to congratulate them on all their years, I don't know how many years. You know, kind of curious, a lot of these students go on to become lawyers or clerks or what? I mean, they seem very, I heard the presentation tonight, you were practicing, very much impressed. So thank you for that in my comments. You forgot to start the clock.
I did.
Thank you.
I didn't see a chance, Warren. I'll do better next time.
Thank you, Warren. Next, we'd like to welcome Michelle Smart.
Thank you, I appreciate that. Warren, I think CTE stands for Career Technical Education, I think. My message tonight is of gratitude. I've been coming to board meetings off and on for a few years, and then took a few months off, and when I showed up a month ago, I was kind of startled to see how much animosity there was. But I have to say that I love that we have a public forum where we can hear voices. And I love that you as a board have presented such a respectful presence, very professional, and I appreciate that so much. We have a place where people can come and share. And so I just wanted to share my viewpoint, which is thank you. It's been a really hard 2 years. And thank you for the incredible amount of time that you give, Superintendent Hansen, directors. Thank you so much. When I was able to stay home in my cozy socks reading stories with my kids, you know, during those extra hours, you weren't. You were putting in extra hours to make it work. AJ, all the extra messages you had to sit down, all the extra communication, the extra work for our health staff, the extra work for our cleaning staff, the extra strain on our teachers and how much they give of themselves. I'm just filled with so much gratitude for this district, and I just wanted to share that. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle.
Thank you, Michelle.
We will now move on to agenda item 4.01, which is our administrative report. Superintendent Hansen, do you have a report for us tonight?
Did I miss that? Did you say there were 3 people or 2?
Oh, there were Warren signed up.
Oh, okay.
Yes, yeah.
One's
Thank you.
going twice. Another question? I'll save my comments for the agenda items.
Okay. We will move on to agenda item 4.02 then, our student board representative report.
I want to make sure I'm using this microphone correctly. I'm not quite certain, but okay, starting. So last Thursday and Friday at the Tahoma Dome, a large amount of the school and the band and the cheerleading squad went down to the Tahoma Dome to help support the Tahoma School boys basketball team, where they placed in 6th at what I understand to be the state tournament. In addition, another tournament also took place over this weekend for speech and debate, where the speech and debate team is sending 6 competitors to the national tournament in Kentucky this June. One of those qualifiers is a BT in the audience tonight. I am sorry for pointing to you, but she is here. On Saturday this weekend, the leadership students and other students also took part in the Bear Den retreat, where, as I understand it, they went on a bus and they got to participate in leadership and community building activities. But looking to the future, we also have registration coming up for freshmen through juniors, as well as 8th graders at the middle school, as they prepare to move on to the high school. And with all the different classes presented by Tahoma High School, they're going to have a lot of fun waiting for the course catalog to fully load on their computers. Also coming up is the talent show at the high school, where students will have the chance to show whatever talents they have, as well as robotics competitions are beginning to start right now. Sanjana is a member of the robotics team, and she's also in the audience tonight. So that is another thing that the student body has to look forward to at the high school. That concludes my report.
Thank you. We will now move on to agenda item 4.03, which is our board director reports. And Director Miller, do you want to kick things off?
Sure. Yeah, I'll be brief. Just a few things that will come up later in the meeting here, so I'll save those remarks for then. But was able to go to two of our schools last week for Read Across America Day, and that just brings a lot of joy. It was wonderful to have the chance to read to some kindergartners and some first graders and see just the joy and the spark of creation that comes from reading, and to be able to celebrate and inspire that joy and that love of reading, that creative spark. It was really quite a bit of fun, and really appreciate the opportunity to go do that and celebrate that with our kids. That's all I got.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Director Vandergraft, would you like to go next? Sure. Director Miller, I am piggybacking a bit on what you just talked about with Read Across America. I was able to also read with some classrooms, and I had a pretty unique experience because I read the same book from kindergarten through fifth, and that book really lent itself to being able to work for those different audiences. But one thing that I shared with you, Mr. Hansen, that I really, one of my takeaways was not only just being with the kids, which I absolutely loved, but my book was very, it was a read aloud picture book, and it had the kind of the premise of, anti-bullying, but the cover is really, it's very ambiguous. Like, it just says one. The book is one I'm forgetting the author, which is terrible, but I'll get back to you. But it's one, and it's just the word one with a blue circle in the middle of it, and I asked the kids, like, what could this book potentially be about? And what I loved was, each class, K through 5, loosely, one of the students said something along the lines of, this book could be about, there's only one of me. There's one of me, and I think maybe that's what the story is going to be about. And I love that because I felt like it really showed the work that the schools are doing and that the teachers are doing around belonging and around kids, appreciating and celebrating their individuality. And I really love that because it was evident that those conversations are happening. So it was a really good experience. And then legislative, there's 1 week remaining in the legislative session. We have, there's 3 bills that I've talked about intermittently throughout the report that have been passed by both chambers and are highly likely to be signed by the governor. And those are House Bill 1723, that was closing the digital divide, that I spoke about last meeting. 1664, which is concerning the prototypical school formula for physical, social, emotional support in schools. And then 1590, which is concerning enrollment stabilization. So that those are moving on. So that's where we're at on that. 1 more week, and that's all I have. Thank you. Director Wiggins?
I don't have a. Oh, it's okay.
Catherine Atashi is the name.
She was not going to look.
I cheated. He helped me. Sorry.
That's okay. I blame mine. I don't really have anything specific. I've been away on some much needed R&R with family the last couple of weeks, but I will say as a note, and thank you for the comment earlier. It was interesting driving back into it's a little anecdotal story. I'll only take a couple minutes, but driving back into Maple Valley after being on break, and I had that same feeling. It's a great community. Like, we've been here for 20 years now, 20 years almost ish, and it's not perfect. None of us are perfect people, but as communities go, it's a wonderful place to be. It's a wonderful district to be in, to be a student in, to be a director in. I think I can speak for the administrators, to be an administrator in. And so coming back in and not, I think I just want to offer some perspective as my report. When you're in it all the time, every day, sometimes it's easy to get myopic on things that aren't working correctly. Or the problems that people are facing, or the issues that we're addressing. But when you have a chance to step away, it does give you some perspective, and you do have a way of seeing the greatness of things. And so I'm grateful for that opportunity, and I'm glad to be back with the board, and I'm glad to be back in the community.
I'm super excited to have three of the people here tonight and listen to the successes of Sanjana and Aditi and Tu and all the wonderful things that our students are doing. It's to me, it's like, it's better when it comes from them. Like, we can sit up here as adults and say, and as board members and administrators say, oh, it's a great place. It's, our students are doing well, even with challenges. It's great when I hear it coming from the students. It's about 1,000 times more impactful to me. So thank you for sharing that. Thank you for the report. And it really just confirms that how grateful I am to be in this district. And that's what I'll just kind of leave you with that thought tonight.
Thank you. And that's actually a great segue to what I was going to share. We are excited to welcome a new board director to our team in the next coming weeks. And so the exciting thing is that you all have the opportunity to actually watch the interviews take place live right here in this room. That'll take place on March 22nd. We encourage you to join us for that. It's always exciting to hear from people about what they see as district strengths, areas that could be improved upon, and so we're certainly looking forward to it and would love for you to join us for that. And with that, we will end this portion of our evening. We're going to go ahead and move on to presentations, discussions, and action items. And as we move into this section of the agenda, I'd like to remind everyone that the board has agreed on using round robin to ensure that each member has equal opportunity to speak. We will keep our discussion length per agenda item to 20 minutes, which I'm going to monitor, and individual board members' discussions to 3 minutes per agenda item, which Mrs. Wheeler will monitor for us. Each director's time will be given with the first word that they speak, and will continue through the responses that are provided. And that will take us to agenda item 5.01, which is Tahoma High School's We the People demonstration. So please come on up. And as they're joining us at the front of the room, I'm going to actually invite Director Wiggins to introduce them, because he's done a lot of work with them over the last couple of months, and so offers some great perspective for us.
Thank you, President. I kind of said a little bit of this already, and I'll ask Gretchen to come up and introduce the team. So, but just a caveat again, I was almost a little bit teary-eyed when you talked about the last 2 years, and I could feel the kind of the emotion in your voice when you said that. And to echo that, it's been the word interesting is AKA for it's been tough. Like a lot of people use the word interesting, but it's been a tough couple of years. Despite all that, these students, and not just We the People, but again, a lot of the other students and a lot of the other organizations, but from my frame of reference, the We the People students have been working really hard despite a lot less than ideal conditions, and especially with all the things going on in society today, all the heavy issues. It's been amazing to watch them tackle those issues in a very smart, very deliberative, very adjudicative sort of way. It's been extremely impressive to me, and as a lawyer, it's a value I have, just in terms of deliberation. And so to see the balance between collaboration and discussion and advocacy has been really, really impressive, and I think it represents what I would like to see the best of all of us in terms of how we deal with issues. And so the We the People team, there's how many teams, Gretchen, total?
So, you mean within our school?
Within our school.
Within our school, we have 6 units that are part of the We the People team, and this year, each of the 6 units have 3 to 4 students on it.
Yeah.
So we have 20 total in the class.
Yeah, so they topped out at state. They won state, which is what has qualified them to go to nationals. Nationals will be a little different than here, but still, they will be going to Washington, D.C. to compete against some of the best and brightest schools in the country. And as a frame of reference, a lot of the schools that they compete against are private schools, heavily funded schools, where you have to qualify and scholarship into these schools. They are hanging out there. They are competing with these teams very, very well. And so it's a huge call out not only to the students but to the program and to Gretchen as well. We should definitely recognize that. So what we'll do is they'll get 4 minutes. they have been assigned they have units, but they have this unit is a particular topic. They'll tell us what that is. They'll introduce themselves. They'll have 4 minutes to respond to their prompt, which is the unit. And after that time, then the board will have an opportunity to ask questions. Gretchen has provided us all with some questions, and we can certainly come up with our own. It doesn't necessarily have to be on the topic. Feel free to ask them about their specific experiences and things like that. And I think that would be good to allow those kind of questions here as well. But with that, Gretchen, is there anything you want to add that I missed? And this is yours.
No, well, no, just thank you for being here. Thank you for, we have incredible community support, school board support, and it's such an honor to teach these students. But so what we are, it's a class where they've studied this Constitution in great depth, and what you'll see is they basically apply the Constitution to current events. This team, I'm so glad it's them presenting, because I don't know if you'll be able to tell or not, but they represent all places on the political spectrum, I'll see. And so what I feel like they demonstrate better than anything is they're an example of civic discourse, just a way to talk about tough subjects in a really wonderful way. So thank you. And yes, I'll let you take it from there.
Do you want to do 4? Can we put them on our official timer? I think that'd be kind of interesting.
Oh,
I thought this thing was hardwired. I can do that. I can do Michael.
Yeah.
Michael, while you're doing that, hey Gretchen, can you stand back up, please?
Yeah, absolutely.
I think, and obviously that we're here to talk about our kids and listen to our kids. If you could do us all a favor, can you tell everyone your background and experience prior to getting into teaching? Folks aren't always aware that people bring a lot of things to the table. So,
Okay,
thanks, Gretchen.
well, so basically most of my adult life was spent in Washington, D.C., where I worked for the government, and I worked for quite a few years, in the Congress. I worked for a different presidential campaign and ended up working for the White House. And so when I was there doing these different types of jobs, meeting these really cool people, I thought, wow, I wonder if someday I can teach civics. Because I love government so much, and I love our Republican democracy so much, and I'd love to bring that to students someday. And it just happened with my, husband, who is a rocket scientist, that we ended up back in this area, and were able to. That's when I started teaching, was later on.
Thank you, Gretchen. We're lucky to have you.
All right, with that, we'll go off your cue. So when you start, Pete, you recommend you to start the talk? Yeah, introduce yourself.
Yeah.
All right, good evening. My name is John Bernil, and my favorite person in politics is Senator Bernie Sanders for his avid defense of the working class, as well as his vote against the recent Keystone XL pipeline.
Hello, my name is Annalise Scholey. My favorite person in politics is Kristi Noem for her advert protection of individual rights and her work under the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of 2017.
Hello, my name is Jonah Wiggins, and my favorite person in politics is Florida Governor Ron DeSantis for his fierce defense of civil liberties and his opposition to the federally enforced mask and vaccine mandates. On behalf of Unit 4, our advisor Gretchen Wolfing, and Tahoma High School, we thank you for judging us tonight.
Okay, if you'd like to ask the question, at the top there, if anybody wants to read it, and then they will respond to it.
So we're Unit 4, question 2, Greg. The President ought to communicate such papers as the public good would permit, and not to refuse those the disclosure of which would injure the public. Do you agree or disagree that the executive can withhold or disclose information at his or her discretion? To what extent, if any, has the claim of executive privilege expanded presidential powers since its inception? And are the constitutional powers that enable the other two branches to counter executive privilege claims sufficient? Why or why not? 4 minutes starts when you start.
Executive privilege is an extraordinary assertion of power not to be lightly invoked. Justice Anthony Kennedy.
We disagree that the executive may withhold or disclose information at their discretion because they are checked by the courts, but the president should nevertheless retain the power in order to preserve the independence required for effective executive function.
In the 1974 case of U.S. v. Nixon, after tapes of specifically identified conversations between Nixon and members of his administration were subpoenaed, Nixon claimed executive privilege to block their release.
The Supreme Court ruled that neither the doctrine of separation of powers nor the generalized need for confidentiality protected Nixon from an inquiry, blocking his claim of executive privilege.
Although in this circumstance executive privilege was invoked in an attempt to improperly block a valid criminal inquiry, the power should be retained by the President as a means to preserve the confidentiality needed to act effectively.
This need for executive privilege is exemplified in Memoranda on Consultations with the President. In the document, Jefferson remarks that in regards to the Jay Treaty, Washington did not like throwing too much into Democratic hands, asserting that his claim of executive privilege was in the interest of keeping the treaty-making process privileged from the House, which is not constitutionally involved, and preserving executive function.
Thus, the power is rightfully checked by the courts. It is nevertheless necessary to preserve the efficacy of the executive.
Executive privilege claims have inappropriately expanded presidential power over time by enabling the executive to evade accountability to the other branches of government.
An example of this is found in a White House memo issued by former President Reagan on November 4, 1982. In response to congressional requests for the disclosure of information, Reagan argued that because he could invoke executive privilege, members of his administration did not have to provide information that could potentially be privileged.
This effectively granted them automatic claims of executive privilege on what they deemed classified documents, protecting the president.
Another example is the 2020 case of Committee on the Judiciary versus Donald F. McGahn II, in which former White House council member Donald McGahn refused a subpoena due to a privilege claim by former President Trump.
The D.C. Court of Appeals denied the suit, arguing that Congress lacked sufficient injury, enabling the Trump administration to stall the release of evidence of potential misconduct via executive privilege.
The 2022 court ruling of United States v. Zabeta reaffirmed the defensive nature of executive privilege when the court ruled on a suit by an alleged former Al-Qaeda member regarding his torture in a Poland CIA facility.
In his dissent, Justice Gorsuch argued that an executive interest in protecting secrets does not extend to quashing suits that Congress has authorized the judiciary to entertain.
This implies his opinion that the executive has utilized privilege to halt suits on superficial grounds, demonstrating how executive privilege has gradually eroded the president's accountability to the legislative and judicial branches.
While the legislative branch lacks the necessary constitutional power to counter claims of executive privilege, the judicial branch has such power but does not use it efficiently.
One way that Congress enforces subpoenas is by holding people in contempt of Congress, per the process outlined in the 1857 statutory contempt procedure. This was established under the congressional power to set its own rules under Article 1, Section 5, Clause 2, though contempt charges rarely occur.
Their other option is filing a civil suit per Justice Department policy, deferring enforcement to the judicial branch.
The courts have the necessary power to counter executive privilege claims as outlined in Article 3, Section 1, Clause 1, by their ability to hear all cases in law and equity arising under the Constitution.
Unfortunately, this power is not always utilized effectively, and the court often takes too long in its decisions, such as in the 1974 case of Senate Select Committee. Would you like to keep going? Please. In Senate Select Committee v. Nixon, in which former President Nixon claimed executive privilege on conversations in connection with the 1972 election.
While the D.C. Court of Appeals upheld the subpoena, it took several months to do so and stalled an investigation into election validity.
Therefore, while Congress lacks the necessary constitutional power to counter claims of executive privilege, the judicial branch possesses such power but wields it ineffectively, enabling the executive to use privilege to evade accountability to the other two branches. Thank you.
You're gonna get that down for nationals, right? I want to quickly point out before we open up to questions from the directors, but Matu is also going to be the people, and I want to point that out. He's also here as a board rep, so he's a very busy young man. So thank you also for your participation. If you have the questions in front of you, feel free. You can ask off the menu or anything that comes to mind. So.
Dr. Miller, why don't we start down here?
Sure, thanks. My question does come off the script. I'm just curious that the principles that are embodied in the Constitution, some of them have tended to make their way down from the federal government to other forms of government, local government, municipalities, school boards, at times, states for sure. And so with regard to this particular issue, I wonder to what extent that has made its way down to other forms of government, and if that's something that happens often or not with federal law and the Constitution, and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing.
So executive privilege specifically has made its way down from the federal government to the state of Washington State, particularly to the powers of the governor. This occurred in the 2013 case of Freedom Foundation v. Gregoire, in which former Governor Gregoire claimed executive privilege over a $2 million expenditure to remove the Alaskan Way Viaduct. In response, the Washington State Supreme Court effectively extended the ruling of United States v. Nixon down to the governor and affirmed the power of the governor to claim executive privilege over particular documents.
This idea of more local governments taking power from, or not from, but in likes to the national government is outlined in our Constitution, actually, in the idea of federalism as outlined in the 9th and 10th Amendment, where the term is layer federal, or the layer K form of federalism, in which all powers not granted to the federal government are then given to the state government, given to the local governments.
Thank you, Director Pendergraft. I like this question. It is from here. What constitutes a national state of emergency, and how, if any, should executive power be modified in these situations?
So a national state of emergency, while it certainly retains this degree of ambiguity, can essentially be classified as any circumstances under which the executive is forced to take action in order to preserve national contentment and or national security. And while there have been court cases made to establish limits on on the extent to which national security can be claimed, one such case being Committee on the Judiciary versus Myers, it is still unclear as to what constitutes a national emergency. However, I think inarguably the president's power of executive privilege should expand to some degree in these types of situations in order to preserve a streamlined function of the executive branch and to preserve, as I already mentioned, national contentment.
I would argue that an incredibly pertinent example of a national emergency would be the current coronavirus pandemic that has been occurring for the past couple of years. This is a circumstance in which the public health was in severe danger, and accordingly, both the local government in the form of Governor Inslee, as well as the national government in the form of President Biden and his former vaccine mandate, as well as his vaccine mandate for healthcare workers in facilities that are funded by the national government. These have been appropriate responses to what I would consider a national emergency.
Dr. Wiggins?
So when we think about the somewhat two different views as we frame the Constitution, right? We think about executive privilege, and almost kind of tailing off of Director Pendergraft's question. How do we balance the concept of executive privilege with the notion of transparency in government, and this idea that the government as a republic is answerable to the people? And the notion of executive privilege almost runs contradictory to that concept. You mentioned in your presentation that there are balances, albeit not directly from the Congress, to challenge executive privilege. They have other ways to pinprick that power, but it comes from the judiciary. So how does that play out? Can you think of a recent example where this has played out amongst today's issues?
So one example where Congress itself has actually been given or proposed to have been given more power to counter these claims of executive privilege would be H.R. 5314, which grants congressional subpoenas more power to effectively investigate claims of executive privilege and, if necessary, block them on the grounds of the Constitution. With respect to the judiciary, because of the power given to them of judicial review, as outlined in the case of Marbury v. Madison, to determine whether action on legislation is constitutional, they are able to quash these claims of privilege likewise if they see it to be going against any specific constitutional provision.
I would argue that the provisions in these bill are absolutely necessary since the legislative branch is ultimately most connected to the people due to the direct election of House members as established in Article 1 of the Constitution. The legislative branch is generally the branch of government that is most accountable to the people, and providing them additional power to check claims of executive privilege is crucial to provide the people themselves the ability to check the president through Congress.
Thank you.
I think I'm going to go off script. So I would like to know, we have the Growth Management Act is requiring that Maple Valley add about 1,800 housing units in our community over the next couple of decades. I'd like to know why that's constitutional and whether or not you believe that it should be allowed.
So the act you were mentioning is certainly allowed. It is a power of the local government to pass legislation that would require funding for something like that. This has previously been done in the court case of McCleary v. Washington, in which the Washington State Supreme Court ruled that education to the state was inequitable. And Title IX of the Constitution, or Article 9 of the Constitution, requires that education be of the highest quality and equal across the state. And so what the court ruled was that the court could require additional funding from the legislature for schools in order to reduce such inequality. And so an act like this is absolutely constitutional since there is precedent for the legislative and judicial branches requiring additional funding from local governments.
Any other questions? Nothing.
Where do we see concepts similar to executive privilege at the local and municipal level?
So executive privilege, specifically in Washington, is an incredibly new concept. As I mentioned earlier, in the case of Freedom Foundation v. McGuire, executive privilege was established in the first place in 2013, meaning it's just over 9 years old in the first place. At a local and municipal level, particularly in Washington, claims of executive privilege and particularly claims of vast executive power are incredibly uncommon due to what the court cited in the opinion on that very case as Washington's populist tradition. We generally have a greater degree of transparency in the executive compared to the national government and especially other states.
I have another question, if that's allowed. You mentioned the J tree. Should there be more congressional oversight of foreign policy?
So I do think it's important to take into respect the historical circumstances of this as our country was in its inception, and any problems arising with widespread capitalization of fear or panic amongst the citizens would likely lead to early problems for our country. So I think in this particular instance, it was kind of imperative that Washington block this investigation by Congress in order to actually, for lack of a better term, get our country up and running. However, in our modern day circumstances, there is definitely an increased amount of political infusion with regards to foreign policy and foreign relations. And as such, the president needs to be held more accountable, whether it be via congressional oversight or some other method, to ensure that this is not getting in the way of maintaining effective relations between countries.
This usurpation by the president has been seen by the taking over of certain powers granted to Congress in the Constitution, such as those outlined in Article 1, Section A, clauses 11 through 16, in which they grant Congress such war powers to be able to interact internationally. And in light of wars such as World War I and World War II, the president has garnered these powers because the people had desired a more energetic executive. But in light of recent years, we do need to make sure that Congress is still retaining their constitutional powers and the president is still being checked in this.
I disagree with my colleagues. I believe that the executive should not be checked, particularly in regards to foreign policy. As my colleague mentioned, the need for an energetic executive was recognized by the founders even during the country's founding. In Federal 70 particularly, Hamilton argued for a unitary, energetic executive in order to effectively institute policy nationally as well as internationally. And so I believe what exemplifies this would be the current volatile situation in Ukraine, which is constantly changing. If, for example, President Putin were to launch a nuclear bomb against Ukraine, it is crucial that the president is able to respond effectively and swiftly without having to wait for Congress, for example, to declare war, which could take weeks or even months.
has We the People prepared you for your future? How are you future ready as a result of what you've experienced?
So for me, I initially decided to take this class because I have an interest in civic participation and the inner workings of our government. And before my senior year, it's kind of always been this complicated, kind of abstract idea. I kind of wanted to get into the details of it and just learn more about it. But ultimately, what I think it boils down to is having this knowledge of how our government works and how we as citizens can affect it just ultimately prepares us for our future as voters, as respectful, proper citizens of the country, and it just allows us to be more informed and make better choices. Because, as our Constitution says, and the name of the class, we the people ultimately determine the future and the shape of our country. So I think that classes like this are very important to educating young minds with respect to that and ensuring they're well prepared.
Kind of piggybacking off of that, I originally took Weeple because I got peer pressured into it. I had a lot of opinions, a lot of which this one has heard. But really I had a lot of opinions, but not a lot of facts to back it up. So an alumni actually reached out to me and said that I need to take this class. I was like, I already signed up for classes, I'm not going to do that. Do it anyway. I was like, okay. Anyway, so I took the class and immediately I just fell in love with the content, and I know that like going into the future, I'm gonna have this passion for our government, and I'm gonna do my civic duties by voting and all these different things that we're allowed to do because I'm passionate about it, because I care about it.
So unlike some of my other colleagues in the class, not just in this unit, I am not going on to be a lawyer or a civic representative. I am majoring in STEM. I'm going into chemistry. But in spite of that, this class has been incredibly important to me. It's been incredibly impactful. I think one of the biggest things that I've taken away, is similar to my colleague Annalise, is that a significant degree of education enabling me to back up my opinions and form new opinions based on actual fact and objective truth rather than whatever I was basing them on before. And I believe that's super impactful. Our unit specifically has a lot of different political opinions, and I believe that my time in this class so far has enabled me to more effectively communicate with people who I do not agree with and have actual discussions with and find common ground, often in surprising places. And I believe that it is really important for me as I go on discussing politics in the future, as well as voting, which is my duty, and it's something that I really look forward to doing whenever I turn 18.
Awesome. You guys are awesome kids.
Thank you for your time. Really appreciate that. I would just add to that being able to help Gretchen and participate in the class, as I've done, and I've reported that on a couple of times during my director's reports. You can actually disagree with people vehemently and still get along with them. It is possible. And so if I've taken anything from this class, that's what I've taken. And so they again, these students represent the best and brightest of us all. So congratulations on your success so far. Good luck in DC. Wish you all the best. Thank you.
Thank you so much. This was a treat. Thank you. We will now move on to agenda item 5.02, which is fiscal transparency. I'm sure there's something about that in the Constitution too. And we will have Director of Public Relations, AJ Garcia, join us.
I feel like this is class briefing, but not.
I believe that life is all about balance, so as our We the People folks spoke, extremely eloquent and intelligent, I'm going to kind of tip the scale. And get us back on track.
Takes all kinds.
Yeah. Tonight, I'm excited to introduce to you all the introduction to a draft of what we're calling a Budget 101 page for the district. This is a project that our chief accountant, Bill Hernandez, and I have been tag teaming, and it's something that we've been discussing since I started in my role, which was this past July. This was a piece that was a direct recommendation from the communications audit that we've all seen and engaged with at this point. And so this page is going to end up serving a few purposes, but wanted you to see the draft of where it was at right now. Let you know kind of the steps that we've gone to get to this point, and then what are the next steps looking like before we make this public and make it accessible for our community to start engaging with too. So this page is going to serve a couple of purposes. The first is really to make our budget process and our financial data just more easily accessible for our community. You know, when I started in my role, it was my first time working in a school system, and so I was hearing a lot of acronyms and terminology and things about our budget process, and I was really feeling like I had to play catch up. And now I'm engaged with this every day, and I'm hearing more about it, and I'm starting to understand it a little bit better. But I'm also in our buildings every day. I'm having meetings with all of you, and I'm in a position where it's easy for me to kind of catch up and learn these things. But I know for a lot of folks in our community who really want to be engaged, they're like me, it's not easy to pick up a spreadsheet and truly understand everything that we're looking at. And so the purpose of this page is really to give more of that 30,000 foot view and get people kind of a foot in the door to understanding the way that our budget works, what drives our budget, where the money comes from, where it's spent, things like that. And so for folks who really do want to be more engaged and learn more about our process, this is kind of that first step. What I'm excited about with this though is that for a lot of folks like you or people in this room who are already pretty thoroughly engaged in the process, there's still going to be accessible information there to monthly budget reports and those spreadsheets and things that I really have a tough time understanding. They're still there for the people that do have an understanding and really want to get into the nitty-gritty side of the numbers. So there's a little something for everyone, but want to do a better job of making the data just more easily comprehensible for anyone within our community. So I'm excited that the page is going to do that. Like I said, we're still engaging with people on our staff and bringing in some other stakeholders and getting their thoughts on it and having them just scroll through the site and click some of the buttons and say, well, this isn't working for me, or I'm not understanding this, or go more in depth in this, or give a definition of what this is, because there's still a lot of, again, those acronyms and things like that if you're not seeing it day to day, you might not understand it. What are ESSER funds when it comes to COVID funding? What are MSOCs? I actually just learned that one from Bill last week after hearing it for the last few months. So things like that are all going to be included in there. We're continuing to expand on it. And I'll take any questions from you.
Questions?
Is your back okay? You're bending over trying to... We need a budget for a higher... I do have a question if I may. So this isn't new information, and I want to make sure that I'm clear on this, right? This isn't information that hasn't been available before. We're just synthesizing this down and making it chewable for everybody, for the community. Did I hear that?
Yeah, exactly. It's not any information that people couldn't access, but maybe previously it was more broken down in spreadsheets and you'd have to really go in there and maybe have a little bit better, you would already need the baseline knowledge that you're seeing in this page to feel like you can truly engage with that. So this is just giving you that first step in that introduction so that when you do look in those spreadsheets and you start looking at expenditures and revenues, you have a better sense of what you're looking at.
Any thought on the rollout of this? As we launched the website, is there any thought like how to make the most out of that?
Yeah, so what I'm excited to use this page for, rather than just have it be a static page that sits there and no one goes to see it, is as we start to share information that includes budgetary information, or we talk about the ways that our community investment has funded certain programs within our district and things like that. This can be a page that we're always pushing back to. So trying to be intentional about when we speak about our budget and the process, rather than just giving our community the information and just trusting that they'll go figure it out on their own. It's linking right to this, giving them that access. So if they have those questions, it's right there for them to go learn more.
Thank you.
Dr. Pendergraft, I can't see you. Do you have a question?
I don't know how in the weeds we want to get on like specifics. So one question is, where will this live? Will this just be on our main kind of website and it will be a tab, or how do you?
Yeah, it'll go on the financial section of the website. But like I said, we're gonna put it within content, and we're gonna weave it through the work that we're doing. So it's not gonna be static where if you don't go dig for it and find it yourself, you're never gonna see it. We're hoping to make sure that it gets out there for people to see.
Okay.
President Hall, for everyone's benefit who has been stuck on the landing page, do you mind if Lori were to scroll through on AJ's computer and AJ can talk about each section
Please.
of what we're able to see that's not on the screen?
You bet, yeah.
Drive, AJ. You drive, I'll steer.
Oh, sure. So as we get into our first part, there's just an introduction for folks to realize what they're getting into. And the first question that we want to answer as we keep scrolling down, Lori, is what drives the budget? And one of the things that I learned pretty early on is that when you really look at the overall budget of the district, and once you get past salaries and operations that we have, there really isn't as much flexibility, at least that I would have expected. And so what leads us to the decision making to utilize that budget most effectively? And it's really the Tahoma Cares goals. It's what our community has told us they want to see done within our schools. Where have we been asked by our community to prioritize our resources? And so when we look at these goals and we know that these are the goals and the targets that we're really striving to accomplish in the next few years, well, then we know where those resources should go to. So what drives the budget? It's really what our community has asked for us, and it's the goals that you've adopted. As we keep moving down, Lori, we get into how we're funded. I think that a lot of folks have the understanding that it's federal, state, local dollars that we use, but explaining a little bit more about the apportionment. Our enrollment is a big part of that apportionment, but there's also some more nuances within there too. From the local level, giving a little bit of a description of bonds and levies and the recent bonds and levies that we've run and how are they being used right now, so people can see really where their dollars are going. When we get beyond that, it's how do we determine how the money is spent. And so you'll see, as I was just mentioning, salary is a huge part of that budget, and you can kind of see the pie of where the money goes to. And you see on that graph, it's that 30,000 foot view that we're talking about to kind of give people that introduction to the way that the funding is spent. But then if you keep moving down, it gets a little bit more specific, and we talked about making it accessible for everyone, but still letting the people who really want to dive in see it too. So what will eventually be linked out here is those links to the monthly budget reports that are presented to you each month. Some of the more specific spreadsheet data, it's still going to be there for everyone to see. We're not taking that away, but for the other folks in the community, it's an opportunity to start here and then work your way into that. And then toward the bottom of the page, I don't anticipate that this will live here forever, because someday we're going to move away from COVID-19, but we do want to give that overview as well of where the dollars have come from, what are ESSER funds, how are they allotted, where does Tahoma rank among some local schools, how much we brought in, how much we're anticipating spending. So that's obviously a piece that we're going to continue to make updates to. And so once this page is fully built and it's launched, we intend to go in here pretty frequently and continue to make updates so that our community can continue to have the latest data.
Thank you. Dr. Miller?
Over the last several weeks, I've spent hours with them going over this and talking through it. So I've seen this, I've spent time with this. So this is just about what I remember it looking like, so I appreciate that. No real questions, although I am just really, I'm extremely excited about the promise that this represents, and the fact that we're going to be driving traffic to this and helping our community better understand all of the moving parts and the dynamics of budgeting for this work, and how we receive money, how we spend money, engaging that conversation, hopefully getting some thoughtful questions from the community about how does this work and how does that work. I want to better understand. I think driving that content to this page and then engaging in those conversations is going to be super valuable. So I appreciate the work that you and Bill have been doing to get this off the ground, and where we're at so far. It's great.
Thanks. And that I think is really the why of this page. We've talked about Tahoma Cares a little bit, and it's that partnership piece. Everyone in our community has the right and should have the tools to really be fully engaged with our budget and that process. And when they're asked to make an investment, they should know exactly what they're investing in, and fully understand what we have going on within the district. So excited for our community to see it and be engaged with it, and like you said, ask those thoughtful questions, and hopefully it's a tool so that even people like me, who when they open up those spreadsheets have no idea what they're looking at, can still access the information and feel truly engaged with our budget.
AJ, I have two questions for you. First, I love what you all have put in place here, and I think it's going to be a very valuable tool for our community. And a wondering I had was, how are you planning on reaching the members of our community who are not hooked into Tahoma through Tahoma Matters and the other variety of communication that you mentioned earlier when you said we'll make sure to add a link to this page and those communications? So, for example, voters who are supporting our levy by paying for our levy, but don't actually receive any Tahoma emails.
Yeah, and when we think about those folks, it's really the one time that we get to shift who's our audience on some of our communication. Most of the time we're talking to our families or to students or to staff, and so expanding that reach to reach those people is an interesting challenge, but I think we get to kind of do it the old-fashioned way. Get them some mailers when we send out our community newsletter. Can we put a QR code to make it accessible for people that way? I think that we can continue, as we think about our entire communications, being able to expand our reach online. I think we're already seeing that we're going outside of just the people that are really tied in with Tahoma, and we're expanding digitally there as well. So when this page makes its way into that social media content and we're able to expand that beyond just the people who are fully engaged already, I think we'll be able to reach them in a number of different ways.
Fantastic, thank you. And then my second question for you is, as you were reading through this page, I was picking up on things in a different way than when I read it the first time. And so I wondered what ideas you all have in the works around how we can communicate this information in ways beyond this website. So, for example, are you thinking maybe you will do a video that explains what COVID funding we received and how we used our dollars? That's just one example off the top of my head. But are you thinking video, social media? Are there other ways you're going to provide fiscal transparency?
Yeah, I think video is a super valuable tool. I think the four of you sitting up there are obviously the ones who are most tied into this. So being able to have you all provide voice to what that process is, and allow people to, again, from that 30,000 foot view, get a better understanding of the work that you're doing, I think is great. And I think video is an important tool to do that. We've been researching a number of other Budget 101 or fiscal transparency pages from other districts, and there are some really good video tools. I think beyond just the pie charts and things you see here, there are also a lot of really other great visuals that we can use. I think the most impactful way that we can get people to engage with the budget and to truly understand the way that their dollars are being used is really around great storytelling. So we have a number of tremendous programs within our district that are funded by local levy dollars, and buildings being safe, warm, and dry because of the bonds that have been passed. So how are we doing an effective job telling stories as they relate to those investments, and really showing our community, hey, these are where your dollars are really at work. And I think that's a lot, probably more impactful than showing them on a chart how that money is being used. So, when we have amazing students come in and show us the work that we're doing, if we can point back to our community and show them that it's really the commitment that they've made, and I think that's the most impactful way to share that information.
Thank you, AJ. Do you have any additional questions?
My only question is, it looks like a lot of the information is right now on this home page. Will it be broken up into separate pages, or you go more in depth on separate pages, or will it just sort of remain there on this one page?
Sure. So we got one other page that's partially built, and that's just a glossary of terms. And so I was mentioning earlier the acronyms, ESSER funds, things like that, talking about bonds and levies. So that's another tab within there where we want to, hey, I got a question. What is this? Well, click here. You can see all the information about it. I think where this starts to branch off is into, like I mentioned earlier, some of the more specific data, the monthly reports, those spreadsheets that people, if they really want to dive in and learn more, there's going to be opportunities to click out and read a lot of those things. So this is meant to be that more surface level view, but then still allow people to get in and weave through some of the more specific data and say, oh, I just read about that on the Budget 101 page. Now I can really see the line items there and get a bit more specific.
Thank you. We appreciate your presentation. That's actually everybody, so you are done.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are going to move on to agenda item 5.03, which is our enrollment assumptions and timelines section. And Lori Cloud, who's our Director of Finance and Operations, will be joining us for this portion of our agenda. And she and Director Miller and Bill Hernandez, our accountant, have been working on all of these numbers. So we appreciate their hard work and are excited to hear from you now.
Thank you, President Hallowell. Yes, just where we want to start tonight is really, this is the first, kickoff. We'll call it a kickoff for the budget process for the next school year, for the 22-23 school year. And if you want to flip to the next slide, AJ, we're going to focus on 3 different areas tonight. The first one being a real high-level timeline on what that process looks like for this year. And then talk about one specific part of that process, which is the enrollment assumptions, and look at also what those assumptions look like right now for our preliminary enrollment projections. And when we look at the timeline, we're going to really kind of talk about the different components and some of the variables that help to make up the budget and the budget process. Starting with the timeline, the first thing that actually should be on this page is tonight, which is the enrollment assumptions and projections. And we are going to, as you can see, that's kind of the first thing that we really need to start considering on what that looks like, because there's so many different variables as we go through this process. And one of the main variables that impacts a majority of the sections of our budget is our enrollment. And once we get some enrollment projections, we will be able to move on to some other different areas. Like the next area we talk about is April 5th, looking at our revenue projections. In order to really start building this budget, I kind of like put it into buckets. I talk about there's the revenue bucket, so the money that's coming in, and then there's the expenditure bucket, which is the money going out. And then there's what the difference of that is, which is what we talk about as our fund balance, and how those two things can impact our fund balance. One of the different variables that we talk about from the revenue projections, like I said, really focusing on those enrollments. And we have historically used a demographer to help look at our enrollment projections and ensure that what we're considering for the next year and up to 5 to 10 years in the future really has some data and some substance behind it. And we use an individual by the name of Les Kendrick, and we've worked with him for years, and I want to go into a little bit more detail about those enrollment projections. But before I do that, give you a little bit of idea some of the other sections as we go through them. And the revenue projections, There's so many different variables that we'll be bringing to you. We will be making recommendations to the board on what those recommendations are. But some examples of that just from the revenue projections would be considerations such as, what are we considering our assessed valuation growth to be for the next year? Because that's going to impact what we're able to collect on our levy dollars, and that will have an impact on our revenue. A big one that we're looking at right now, and as Haley was pointing out tonight, is what are the impacts from the legislative session? And we're in a middle of biennium legislative session, which typically we do not see a lot of impacts, but this year we're going to be seeing some significant impacts to our budget. So what are the impacts to our budget as a result of those? Also talking about, we talked a little bit about all of the different fiscal impacts, the IPD. What does inflation look like over the next year? Keeping in mind, as we're working through these revenue projections, not only are we just looking at it for next year, but in order to really determine what our glide path is, we need to be looking out for like 3 to 5 years of what the impacts of all of these adjustments are. So once we have some revenue projections, we'll be bringing those to you to the board on April 5th. Once we have those, that's legislative session is finishing up next week, as you know. I'll give us some time to get what those impacts are and bring some projections to the board, and also some of those variables that we've made recommendations on. After that, we'll start putting together the salary projections for next year. And again, there's other variables that we need to consider when we're looking at that. As you saw, or when you heard AJ talking about the large percentage of our budget is salaries and wages. So that is a big chunk of our budget, and really digging into what the variables and impacts are for projections. After that, we really bring to you the expenditure projections, because in addition to salaries and wages, we have all of the operating costs. So we'll start working on those by the end of next week. We'll have our department starting to working on those operating budgets for next year. That will be May 24th. And then between that, for the month of May, we're really continuing to define and refine what that budget looks like. And based upon what that bottom line looks like, once we roll these numbers up, we'll really determine what the month of June looks like as far as interaction with the board and necessary involvement and conversations that are going to need to happen. Once we plan on having the budget completed by June 28th and presented to the board. For those of you that don't know, one of the requirements is that we have to have the budget published, not only for people we actually have to publish in the paper that the budget is ready for people to review. And we have to have it available for review here at the district office. And it has to be available for 2 weeks prior to the public hearing. So we announce that there's a public hearing, we'll publish that for 2 weeks. That will run in the local papers and on our website. And then we'll have a hearing on July 19th. And once we have that hearing, in the next week will be the adoption, should that be the decision of the board. Historically, this is a pretty typical timeline of what we've seen historically for the last few years. But again, I want to say, you can see in the month between May 24th and June 28th, there is a lot of work that's being done behind the scenes to get that budget to a point where the board is ready to vote and adopt. So we're going to focus the rest of our time on the actual enrollment assumptions. And as I said, historically, we've used a demographer. I was hopeful that we would have those new estimates, updated numbers from last time I spoke to him. We were hoping to have them done actually by the 1st of March. Unfortunately, he's not going to be able to have those done towards the end of March. So we anticipate having those updated numbers. And the way that he has historically, I should say, adopted or worked on developing those numbers really has a lot of different variables that he's taking into account. And from what's happening from birth rates in the county to what they see in actual house sales, available lots, We've actually already had a Zoom meeting with the city where Les was able to answer and have a lot of questions answered regarding an additional housing growth that we plan. And he's also going to focus a little bit more on the house resales, which we think has had an impact this year. So I did forward that to the board members. The actual last report we had from him was March of last year. And there was a lot of assumptions that had to be made when he went through that as a result of what was going on and how the impact that we had seen in our district on enrollment and the decline in enrollment, which was seen throughout the district and areas. He works with a number of school districts in the Northwest, so it was pretty similar results that he was seeing. So he provided a lot of information to the districts and made a lot of assumptions. And the way that he develops those assumptions, he bases it up on 3 different levels: low projection, medium projections, and high projections. And we have historically been a pretty strong, fast-growing district for our area. And based upon that, historically, when using his projections, we would have been using the high projections when we would receive his results. But based upon what we had been seeing, and based on his recommendation last year, we went with medium-term projections. And as you know, right now we are still below budget in our projections. So what I have done thus far, not wanting to wait for updated numbers from him for a month, we don't want to wait that long. What I've done is I've taken his projections that he had for this next school year, 22-23, and I've kind of tried to compare those to where we actually are at right now. So looking at what he anticipated on where we're at. And if you recall, his numbers are based upon head count. So head count are the number of people or students sitting in a seat. And what we receive funding on is FTE, full-time equivalent. So we have to basically convert those head count numbers to a full-time equivalent. An example of why wouldn't they be the same, an example would be a student that attends half of their day in Running Start. And so it's a head count. That student attends Tahoma. It's a 1 head count, but he only sits in our seats half of the day, so he's only a 0.5 FTE. So we have to adjust for all of those particular nuances. So I've taken his low projections and adjusted his numbers from head count to FTE. Also did some analysis on his results by grade level. And when I looked at his results or his projections on where he thought we would be for this year, and I compared them to our actuals, on the low projections, his numbers were fairly close to where we ended up. It was off by like 30 FTE, so pretty close. But the areas that seemed to be more significantly variant were the grade level growth and also on the schools, because he had made some estimates by school. So we have made adjustments by grade level based upon what we saw this current year as growth by grade level and by location. And another item that he did not have in his numbers that he wasn't aware of when he did his projections last year was our transitional K program, our transitional kindergarten program. So I went ahead and adjusted those numbers to include transitional kindergarten for next year. And then the last item for adjustment is he bases his numbers, as I said, on head count, and he bases it on an October 1 head count. Then once I adjust it for FTE, I also have to adjust it as an average for the year, because we're funded not just as of October, but we're funded for our enrollment for the whole year. So I estimate what that growth is throughout the year and reduction for certain grade levels to come up with an average FTE for the year. So if you want to go to the next slide. So based upon all those assumptions and adjustments, what you're looking at right here are the preliminary enrollment numbers for 22-23. On the far left is our budget, which if you recall, I just said that was the medium projections that we utilized for last year. And the next column is where we're at right now, is if we were just looking at it as of February, our actual enrollment, FTE. The next column being the preliminary budget, with all of those adjustments and assumptions made. And you can see the increase, if you were just to compare what we where we're actually at right now versus where I estimate we will be using less low projections for FTE. It's an increase of 220 FTE from where we're at right now. Just a couple of numbers to keep in mind. If you look at where we're at last year compared to, we ended up actual FTE, where we're at right now, 8473, and compare that to last year, we actually did grow, so we received some of those, we were able to get some of those students back, approximately 291 FTE above last year. But we're still below that 19, right when COVID hit, 1920, we're still 126 FTE below that number. So we're still trying to gain and get back to those numbers. If you look at the 220 FTE increase that I have here as a low projection, that's actually 94 FTE above where we were at when COVID hit in 1920. So now with the low projections, we're now finally getting back to the levels that we were at in 1920. One thing to keep in mind as LES's numbers come in at the end of March, based on those numbers, if there's significant changes or swings or assumptions in those numbers, then we'll be bringing back another adjustment and recommendation to the board for enrollment projections. Any questions on enrollment?
Thank you, that was so clear. It was very clear, so thank you. You're welcome.
Lori, I just have a question about what you need from us tonight. So in terms of how we can support you going forward, do you need something specific from us, or is this just an update?
It's just really an update and knowing where we're at for assumptions for enrollment. If there's any other questions or concerns regarding using the low projections at this time, it would be good feedback to have on, hey, Lori, what if we were to look at this a little differently and we were to really consider, we believe maybe medium would potentially make more sense. Asking those questions of why they don't and giving me direction to go back and look at it differently would be things I would be looking for at this point.
On that, Laura, is there anything that you could contemplate that would shift it, like in the interim? Like what would you see could actually move you off that?
Yeah, the only thing right now would be what I said, if Les with Northwest Data Solutions comes forward with his projections at the end of the month with some differences from what he had projected from last year for low. For instance, if he had some data showing some additional growth because of resale values were running higher than what he had anticipated before, or some other variable that he was able to point to that says, no, I don't think the low makes sense, or now my low number is different than what I projected last year. Those would be really what we'd be looking at.
Where does this have us land for K-3 class sizes? What are you anticipating for that? Are we moving around on that? Are we staying firm? Where are we going to end up, do you think?
Good question. If you just roll everything up right now with these numbers and look at what we have currently for our staffing, that'll be the next step. So we'll be looking at staffing levels. Yeah. But right now, if you just utilize where we're at, we're running really close to where we want to hover, right around 20 FTE.
Do you have any questions or comments?
I don't think so. I think it was mostly covered. My only question was that previous, because you mentioned that you had worked with the state council briefly, if the housing sales and growth sort of made you think that these numbers might change, but it sounds like that we'll have to wait to see how that bears out on the first report.
Correct. We just have to take a couple steps back, go back and recalibrate our revenue projections, which would be easy to do. That's really just putting those into the model and then looking what the impact could be if enrollment changes. Not only does it impact enrollment, not as they impact revenue, it can also impact expenditures if we have to look at, as Keith was pointing to, class sizes.
Just kind of a little bit different, but back to what's the legislature going to do? And that's obviously a big variable in all of this. But at times it seems like certain years, maybe we know at the end of March or April what's going to happen, and particularly in the last few years, we've had surprises come through much later into May and June, where funding kind of gets dropped in our lap for one reason or another, things change. Do you have an expectation of when we'll reasonably know what that picture looks like as far as funding from the state?
Very good Very good question. I would say typically when we're waiting, like last year, it's usually when it's in that biennium budget where they're really, that's normally when we're seeing big adjustments to our legislative revenue. Normally in these in-between sessions that we're seeing like this year, typically we don't see big swings, but what we're hearing and what we're seeing right now is there's some areas that we will could potentially see some additional funding. Then there's House budgets out there and there's Senate budgets out there. There's recommendations that from the governor's office. And when you start to see those three lines align on certain items, you can kind of get a really good idea of what to anticipate. We were hopeful, based upon some early work and lobbying that was going on, that we were going to receive some pretty significant additional ESSER dollars. We talked about that. We were one of the districts that did not benefit from the ESSER funding. And so there was some really good on both House and Senate sides that there was some potential moving from that $500 per student floor, which is where we were at, up to $1,000 per student, $1,200 per student, up to $1,500 per student. And that was significant. There was like $8 million that we could have been potentially, one time only, been benefited from, but that died about a week and a half ago. And if you would have asked me earlier, I would have thought for that had a lot more, maybe not the higher levels, but I had a firm belief that we were going to see something from that, so that was a surprise. However, there's still a few bills out there, one of them being the stabilization dollars that seems to be flowing through and has some potential. And that was, if you recall, that was one of the big things that kind of fell in our lap last year that we weren't expecting, were those stabilization dollars, kind of giving us the revenue that we anticipated based upon our budgeted or our previous 18-19, when we went back to what those numbers looked like 19-20, right when COVID hit, going back to that 19-20 enrollment, so that we didn't have any loss of revenue due to all those students that have disappeared from the system throughout the state. So that there is still that bill that's potentially out there. It looks like it has a potential of about $1 million, $1.3, $1.2 million that we could benefit from, that I believe we could receive for this school year, one time only. So there's that's kind of hanging out there that we're waiting to see. There's also, as a result of that, some anticipated potential LEA dollars, those local levy equalization that we receive, because our assessed valuation is so low, we actually receive state money to make it as equitable as what the state came up with when they did the, we call the levy swap. There's a potential that we could receive over the next couple of years another potential $1 million. And then the only other area that I see that there's some definite potential, and these are longer term, these are revenues that we're going to receive over the next 3 years. They're going to fund some of it next year, some of it the next year, and so forth. And it really is around that prototypical model, and it's really focused around the wellness, health and wellness of our students. So counseling, health, all of those areas, and that's really trying to understand what that looks like, and then what requirements, as what we say, what strings are attached to those dollars, to make sure that we understand what the implications. And keep in mind, whenever we're funded for those type of positions, Pete, remember that there's always additional expenditures that we don't get funded for. So the state funds on a formula based upon what they fund us for. So it's based upon the funding of that prototypical model. It's not based upon the number of staff that we have here in our district. So anything above and beyond, or that we pay above and beyond for our staff would have to come out of our local levy dollars.
But if it's
Wait, I'm sorry, we have to pause for a second. So actually, you're past your 3 minutes. Yeah, and we have to do 20 minutes. So you're breaking 2 rules at one time. Do we want to continue the discussion? I just need to do a thumbs up if we do. Yes, okay. And you're past your 3 minutes. Yes. I feel bad. I feel like that. Okay. So that is everybody. So thank you, Lori. We really appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Tonight.
We'll see you next month with some more additional information.
yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you.
If anybody else needs, Molly, I did not resend the demographer's report to you, but if you need it, let me know. I can resend it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. We will move on to agenda item 5.04, which is action to approve our second reading of the adoption of policy 2125, which is all of our sexual health education. May I please have a motion to approve agenda item 5.04, action to approve the second reading, adopt policy 2125, sexual health education.
I move to approve our second reading to adopt policy 2125, sexual health education.
Second.
Vice President Miller motion and Director Williams seconded. Thank you. As Executive Director Don Wakely is joining us, I'd like to remind everybody that we discussed this, in our first reading of this policy at the January 25th board meeting, and we discussed it for about 20 minutes. The second reading to approve this policy was pulled from the February 8th board meeting consent agenda and was placed on tonight's regular agenda so that we could have further discussion before its adoption. So, Director Wakely, I will hand it over to you.
Thank you. Just wanted to be here to be able to answer any questions that you might have connected to this. One of the pieces that sometimes, as you read this and you ask yourself, well, what exactly does it mean to have comprehensive sexual education? And a piece of that is actually detailed in the policy a little bit. It certainly kind of starts to describe that as you look at that idea about the curriculum and experiences being medically accurate and all of that. But I would share just a couple of things that maybe aren't quite as clear. There is, it's actually defined in the bill itself to be recurring instruction in human development and reproduction. It needs to be medically and scientifically accurate, age appropriate, and appropriate for all students regardless of protected class. As I shared earlier, when I brought this forward, what does that actually mean for Tahoma and for the experience that our students are getting? And in reality, it's not going to be dramatic, drastic changes for our students in the curriculum that we have. We've been teaching sexual health at grade levels, starting at grade 4 with a puberty lesson, basically. We have used a video that students have watched, one for boys and one for girls. And then we've had lessons that have progressed up across the grade levels. And so this isn't going to be drastically different. There's still the option and the expectation that we let families know exactly what we're teaching for sexual health. That's happened historically. We've had a family information night connected to the curriculum. Families have been able to come and actually see the resources that we're using. And they've also had the option to be able to opt their child out of those particular lessons. That will still happen. So we do have a review group that is looking at new resources. We will not be done with that in time for any of the new resources to be used this year. We won't have time to complete the adoption process, nor to do training for our teachers in time for any of the lessons for this year. So we will be doing lessons, certainly, in sexual health this spring, just like we always have, but it will just be using the resources that we already have in place. What questions might I ask or answer for you?
How does our curriculum or the curriculum that we're moving to kind of measure up with surrounding schools?
Well, we don't have one right now. So, and I'm not going to speak to the work that the group is doing. We're certainly looking, they're looking right now. They're just in the screening process connected to the new curriculum. So they're looking at resources that are one on the recommended OSPI list because we need to, that's one of the expectations. And they're also looking at resources that other districts are using and liking in the response with students.
And then my other question just would be, and I think you went over this a little bit last time, just the opt-out piece. I always appreciate as a parent, I did get all that information coming home about what would be taught in the classroom upcoming for both my son and my daughter. I always appreciated that. I also have liked the little the tips on what we can discuss at home. How do you see, so I think about maybe a family that doesn't have perhaps the ability or maybe the comfort level to discuss the things that come home for the parents, like the tips, are those the discussions that are offered for use at home? Do those play very much into the classroom? So like if my kid comes to school tomorrow and we've had a conversation around dinner, but then maybe his friend didn't ever have that chance, or maybe their family didn't feel comfortable, is that going to be real apparent in the classroom the next day? Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, I do. The teachers are try to be really, really conscious that kids are going to be at all different levels connected to just their comfort. And in general, kids, I would say actually on all grades. At first I was going to say younger grades, but I think it's true that all grades are going to have varying degrees of comfort with the content and the reaction of themselves and also their perceived reaction of their peers around them. And the teachers try to be really conscious of that. The strategy that is typically used in classrooms is actually that students write their questions on a note card and the teacher collects those. And that way it gives the teacher a chance to actually scan the question and not just blurt out of questions. It gives them a chance to look at it and to be able to, in some cases, reframe it a little bit so that might be a little bit more appropriate, and then to try to answer that. And so, and I would say that that's done all the way from grade 4, all the way in talking with Sarah Russell, who is one of the ones who's taught, actually helping to lead the review process for us, and certainly has taught for a long time. We have both the junior high, when we had the junior high, and now the senior high. They do that with students in 9th grade, just like they do with students in 4th grade.
Thank you, that's helpful. Helpful little glimpse into the classroom.
So like many policies, that the conversation doesn't happen at the policy level. It basically says that we will basically implement what is required from the state OSPI, and then we will select. So to me, the question goes, and if I were a parent, I would say, well, where do I look to see what potentially is coming down the pipeline? And if I'm going to exercise my that option to kind of pull my kid from the curriculum on that particular piece, has anything changed at the state level? We haven't really. What I heard you say is we haven't really had a chance to adopt new ones for this year or come next year. But has anything happened at the state level that is different from last year, where if I'm trying to make that decision about my child, I would then go up there and kind of do nothing's changed?
No. Materials and lessons are all at the local level. And so, when we have the parent information nights, which will actually happen here in March, we're going to do them for the lessons that we'll do this spring, that are the old resources, right, but still the same lessons that we've done. And we'll do those meetings. We found it, actually, we got a lot of good response doing them remotely last year. And so we'll record that in case a family misses it or is unable to attend that night.
I think my question was, sorry if I confused the question, but not so much, I understand the process, but you mentioned in the presentation that there's a recommendation list that was from the state that we pull from to populate our curriculum. Has anything on that level changed that you would want to call out to?
Yeah, there's definitely, if we were to look at the list today that's there, and we were to look 2 years ago when the legislation first passed, there are more resources that are on today and have been approved than there were then. But that's more a function of, it's not a function of like OSPI, it's just a function of more publishers having a chance to create curriculum and then it going through the process at the state.
Thank you.
Thank you for clarifying.
Vice President Miller, do you have any questions?
I have one question. Generally, what I've been hearing a lot about this is that nothing's really changing at our level, that what we have been doing we will continue to be doing, which just makes me wonder, well, okay, then what changed at state level that is creating a lot of discussion. Were we just that much more progressive in offering something that the state is catching up to what we're doing now? Or what changed at the state level that is not really impacting us?
I think the degree to which people were teaching sexual health education varies across the 297 districts. And I think there was recognition of wanting there to be this even playing field for our students as far as the experiences that they have gotten. Certainly one of the things that has gotten the attention of, I think, our state legislature, when you look at the Healthy Youth Survey that is given, every 2 years, grades 6, 8, 10, and 12. We've participated a number of years in that with our students, and you look at some of the questions connected to what's happening with students, whether it's some just general knowledge about how their bodies work and function, or whether you look at questions where maybe there has been some sort of experience with unwanted touch or something like that. The idea connected to really importance of just saying, you have to, I love the words that they use connected to affirmative consent and bystander training, which is one of the expectations for what has to be one of the components that needs to be taught very directly. And it's, in the case of affirmative consent, it's giving and receiving consent for any activity that includes clear, voluntary, enthusiastic permission. It's not just the absence of no. So really helping to teach our students that that moment of me just being silent is not tacit permission connected to that. Like, that's not okay. And that's a hard concept at times, and we want to be really clear about what we give permission for to do, and that we empower our students to understand that that's choices that they're making, and to make them feel okay about being able to be really clear on what happens for us. So wanting that and having the data from the Healthy Youth Survey that says that that's an issue for our kids is pretty compelling as far as our legislature is concerned.
Thank you.
And Jim?
I have not any questions at this time.
Okay, thank you. Since we don't have any other questions, I will call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Agenda item 5.04, action to approve the second reading and adoption of the policy 2125, sexual health education, passes 4-0. Thank you, Director Wakely. We will now move on to agenda item 5.05, which is the review of the revised procedure 3226P, interviews and interrogations of students on school premises access. And Director of Human Resources, Mark Cook, is now going to join us to present and answer questions from the board.
Thank you, President Hollowell. As a procedure update, this is just informational for the board. As we know, there were protests in 2020, 2021 around the country, and in the 2021 legislative session in Olympia, there were some changes regarding what police officers could do on school campuses, and WASDA in December of 2021 sent out a procedure update to reflect those changes from the legislature, and that's what's in front of us. Interestingly, in the last week in Olympia in the 2022 legislative session, much of this is being discussed, and I may be back in front of you in a month or 2 or 6 months with more changes. But the changes tonight, well, I guess the first part is not a change. Board policy and procedure currently says, and will still say with this change, the district discourages interviews and interrogations of students on school premises. If a CPS worker or if a police officer or someone else from the state needs to interview a student, interrogate a student, we recommend they do that not at school because we want to preserve school as the safe place for education. Some of the changes that you'll see in the procedure, in the past, it was up to the law enforcement officer or the CPS worker to determine if someone else would sit in the room while the student was interviewed. That has shifted now. It's up to the student to decide if they want the principal to sit in or their parent to be there, that sort of thing. And on page 2, it talks about if the student has been is being interviewed by law enforcement because they're accused of committing a crime, the student has to either have their parents or an attorney present, and the police officer has to inform them of the right and connect them with an attorney before the interview takes place. That's one of the things being debated in Olympia right now, whether that stays or goes in the future. Any questions I can answer on the updated WASDA language around interrogations or interviews of students on campus?
Mark, do you think it's premature to nail down the policy when the issues still sounds like from what you said it's kind of in flux in Olympia?
Well, these were changes that happened a year ago. And the WASDA model policy came out in December, so we're just reflecting that. And until the law changes, which might be tomorrow, which might be in a month, which might be never, I'm okay recommending that we change the policy to reflect the law that's currently in place.
Having been a law enforcement officer and also a parent and also a lawyer, so I think I have all the angles covered inside, but I do see issues with the interview part of this. Has this passed like a judicial review at WASDA level? Do they vet this outside of legislative? Does that question make sense? And if so, has it passed that muster yet?
Yeah, this is the recommended changes from WASDA. Yeah.
Upon, like it's been judicially vetted?
Yeah, this is from the WASDA attorneys.
Just to be clear, it's we're talking about a procedure.
Right.
Policy is not up for discussion tonight. It is as it is. That's right.
That's correct.
Machu, do you have any questions or comments?
I don't think I really have any right now, because these seem to be fairly minor. Well, not minor changes, but on the grand scheme of things, there's no broad sweeping changes that the school operates and decides whether the students or police officer initiates who needs to sit in on the interviews, which I think it sounds like would be one of the major things, along with whether an attorney is present.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Director Cook. We appreciate you joining us.
I'm happy to be here.
We will now move on to agenda item 6.01, which is action to approve our consent agenda. May I please have a motion to approve agenda item 6.01, action to approve our consent agenda?
I move to approve our consent agenda.
I second the same.
Vice President Miller motioned and Director Wiggins seconded. Thank you both. I will call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Agenda item 6.01, action to approve our consent agenda passes 4-0. We will now move on to agenda item 6.02, which is action to approve the minutes of the February 8th, 2022 board meeting. May I please have a motion to approve agenda item 6.02, action to approve the minutes of the February 8th, 2022 board meeting?
I move to approve the minutes of the February 8th, 2022 board meeting.
I second the same.
Vice President Miller motioned and Director Wiggins seconded. Thank you both. Do we have any discussion? Since there's no discussion, I will call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Agenda item 6.02, action to approve the minutes of the February 8th board meeting passes 4-0. And that brings us to agenda item 6.03, which is action to approve the minutes of the February 15th work study. May I please have a motion to approve agenda item 6.02, action to approve the minutes of the February 15th, 2022 work study?
I move to approve the February 15th work study minutes.
Second the same.
Vice President Miller motioned and Director Wiggins seconded. Thank you. Do we have any discussion? Since there's no discussion, I will call for the vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Agenda item 6.03, action to approve the minutes of the February 15th work study passes 4-0. Agenda item 6.04, action to approve the minutes of the February 28th, 2022 board meeting. May I please have a motion to approve agenda item 6.04, which is action to approve the minutes of the February 28th board meeting?
I move to approve the February 28th, 2022 board meeting minutes.
Second the same.
Vice President Miller motioned and Director Wiggins seconded. Thank you. Do we have any discussion? I will call for the vote. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
I abstain. I wasn't.
You're just going to get us out of the rhythm of it. Okay, so agenda item 6.04, action to approve the minutes of the February 28th, 2022 board meeting passes 3-0 with Director Wiggins abstaining because he was not present. Thank you. And that brings us to agenda item 7.01, board inquiry tracking system, which we also affectionately call BITS. And Superintendent Hansen, do we have any BITS items?
No, but I'm happy to report I've created a magnet for the whiteboard, and the BITS topic is on there for discussion for placement on work study.
Magnets are big deals. So that's awesome. Okay. We will now move on to agenda item 8.01 then, and that is the adjournment of our meeting. Thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you next week.